do keep the questions do keep the questions coming through the chat and the Q&A. So we've got a question which could probably be asked to a few of you. Have you come across solutions where a wheelchair can be turned into a hand trike? So these are not typically recognised as cycles, but what role can they play in increasing active travel journeys?
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
The hand cycles that are out on the market currently, I would say aren't great in terms of like what it takes to get them moving. It's quite an endurance activity. They're very heavy, and oftentimes people feel comfortable in their own chairs. So there are several attachments being made, either electric hand assist attachments or just scooter attachments that can hook up to a hand cycle, or just regular hand cycle attachments that can hook up to an existing chair. And we just added one to our program. I haven't used it yet, but I've heard a lot of great things from people in the community.
And Emily, you had your hand up there.
Yeah, I wonder if Keith has a personal experience of using one before I jump in and say anything.
Keith?
Not personal experience. No, I have this problem that I'm paraplegic from chest down and arthritic. So yeah, yeah, there are here are quite a number of adaptations that can be put onto wheelchairs, from hand cranks especially. But when we were working with Robin McCormack, this is from Mac's perspective, we specifically requested, because this is what we were hearing from disabled people, if motorized adaptations, you know, like a battery adaptation, could be put in on the list of available adaptations, because for a lot of disabled people that is the only answer, and it works.
Great. Emily, did you have anything to add to that?
All I was going to say was, yeah, we do. So I manage the Edinburgh ABC, so the all-ability bike centres that we had in Edinburgh, and included in our fleet we have a selection of hand cycles, and some of them are really very lightweight actually, but they're very, very expensive. We also have a wheelchair adapter, which which is obviously more accessible in lots of different ways, not least cost, but storage as well. It's much easier to just, and you don't have to figure out the logistics of transitioning from your chair into a hand cycle. So yeah, there's lots to be said for them. That's kind of all I would say, I guess.
Could I add to that Ryan mentioned this? I think the biggest barrier to disabled people using cycles, whether it's an adapted cycle or whether it's an adaptation to the wheelchair that enables them to cycle in one way or another, is the disability gap. You mentioned it was $64 to the dollar in Oregon, Ryan. Scotland, it's 68 pence to the pound at the very best, and that's the biggest barrier there is.
Yeah, and so Ryan, you mentioned the sort of patron bike ownership model that you're exploring. Is that something that's come about to kind of address that, and is that something that could be considered in Scotland?
Yeah, so what we're exploring and what I hear from a lot of the patrons that we have is folks are coming up to try something out in the hopes of eventually being able to afford their own. Point-to-point trips don't necessarily work. The recreation model does work, but it does require people to come to our location, find parking, all of these other barriers that exist to them. If they were to own something, they just go out to their garage or their foyer or whatever, get on their bike and leave from their house or from their apartment or wherever. What we're exploring is partnerships with other nonprofits who already exist in the space, who have greater access to funding. And I'm kind of imagining the model will look something like you complete 50 hours with us, you know, in a public bike share model, and then you would become eligible for funding for your own piece of equipment. That's kind of how I see the model going. You know, and that says that the person is committed, you know, and then there would also have to be, you would have to remove other barriers like maintenance and things like that. But I can potentially see it working as long as there's access to that funding.
Yeah, and Jan, I was gonna say,
all I was going to say with this is that I think we're talking about the transfer of the person, that the person would prefer to stay in the wheelchair with an adaptation being put onto the wheelchair. Am I right with that? Because for me, although there are sort of definitely hand cycles, some that are upright, some more recumbent, semi-recumbent, etc., this person still needs to be able to transfer over to the bike. So I guess that what I'm not clear about from this conversation is, are we talking definitely about sort of a wheelchair user who just wants an adaptation put on their bikes? Because that's about design, I think.
yes, so I think the first question was about an adaptation to their wheelchair rather than a separate bike for them. Yes.
Yeah.
And Jan, just I was going to ask you what your thoughts were on sort of a patron bike ownership model, and is that something that you've ever explored or you've heard talked about in Scotland at all?
No, what we mainly do is take a van and bikes out to evidence the need for the range of bikes that we have, and that would include, you know, something like a hand cycle, semi-recumbents, etc. So it's more, so we haven't actually gone down the road of somebody patroning, you know, sort of an actual bike. It's more about taking the selection that's out there already to let people know the availability of bikes. And then you'll find that the people themselves, the users, will suggest adaptations to those bikes. And that's when you can develop the design, is my view.
And Dan, you were going to say something there. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Problem with Jan and Dan in the conversation. It sounds very similar. Yeah, I'd sort of broaden out the discussion as well. I mean, our sort of message of inclusivity was sort of messaged quite well in a report that we released last year. And one of the three factors in broadening inclusivity for cycling in season towns was about the no cost barrier, which is addressed here, making it more welcoming and supporting for all people to cycle, and addressing some of the sort of language and imagery that is presented out there, particularly from an organisation like ourselves who are there to represent cyclists across and active travel users across the board. So making sure that there's that more imagery so that there can be that sense of inclusivity, and on top of that as well, more free cycle training as well for these more adapted modal types as well, just so that there is that sort of no cost barrier, no sort of impediment to confidence using these bikes, but also so no cultural barriers, because you're seeing imagery out there promoting and supporting that modal use.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I'm very sorry, but we are running out of time. So that is the end of our Q&A session. So thanks everyone